Parker Schneebel and Ness faced off against head on the identical Yukon terrain, each aiming for the highest payout of the season. Digging continuously for weeks led to one auspicious battle. Additionally, when the cleanup struck the scales, the figures astounded Deverian. Rick left carrying an incredible $170 million prize, leaving Parker was caught off guard. His season's wager crushed in a moment. Don't overlook Ioni twist in the drive for gold. Similar to and for more, subscribe today. The night sky roar shattered across the Yukon, of motors and the grating metallic roar of excavators rubbing up against icy earth. Spotlights pierced capturing the steam of breath in the dark from folks who had gone days without sleep. On Parker, on one side of the valet crew of Schnabel struggled to maintain the salary, transporting dirt, the machines consuming ground at a speed that borders on reckless. On Ness, the other, and his tough-headed squad positioned themselves against their floodlights, silently at work, each and every gravel scoop bearing the weight of a billion-dollar risk. Neither party was aware, not yet. However, the following few hours would light one of the most destructive treasures, competitions that contemporary gold mining had ever observed, an increase that would culminate in a discovery so extensive that mining may be rewritten actual history. Initially, it appeared to simply another uncooperative piece of land. Its location had been written off months prior, after geologists wrote it off as arid. However, as Rick's team dug farther, under their organization, resistance changed. Rather than gravel or clay, their dense veins of minerals were struck by machinery. Their ever-burying like iron on steel is the sound. Sensor readings increased, deviating from records, and the dirt started to release faint, shimmering metallic fragments even beneath the mud. Rick leaned closer, a calloused finger gliding through the soil. And for a brief moment even he found it difficult to accept what he was witnessing. It wasn't flake or dust. It was uncooked, crystalline gold that is somehow linked together that implied not only a vein, but also a mother lode. News spread quickly. Parker, whose empire was founded on discipline and accuracy, swept across the searching line, suspicion appearing in his eyes. He had been watching Rick for years. Go from being the underdog to the enemy, always misunderstood him, constantly persuaded his own business would last longer than any contestant. However, currently, in the spotlight off lights of the Yukon, Parker's poise broken. His geologists rushed in order to data recalculation, and cross-referencing from the preceding months had reported irregularities, but were hidden under layers of ambiguous findings. Few had no one had discovered through relentless wish to confess. The Earth under Nethric's business was located atop a geologic alpha zone that can trap enormous amounts of gold. It wasn't intended to be feasible. However, the figures didn't tell a lie. As they delved farther, the stranger it became. Rather than the typical dispersion covering flake and nuggets, enormous portions of ore that had fused with quartz started to surface and elements of rare earth. Every element explained a tale of intense geological force, a record of rising pressure on gold throughout the crust and bursts of explosive molten rock. However, there was something otherwise. There were traces embedded in the quartz between platinum, palladium, and even iridium. Due of their rarity, metals are found more frequently in meteorites than in veins in the ground. There were whispers among thinkers that weren't merely dragging treasure found on the ground. They could be discovering the remains of a calamity maiden for millions of years in a fault line that resembles a record of most violent period in Earth's history. Then Erevet's revelation that broke the delicate Tetris between the crews. Rick's digging machine bucket pulled up not just ore, but also the remnants of a wooden building that collapsed. Permafrost-preserved timbers that appeared stuck in time. Sculptures along the beams and unexpected bore markings. Early etchings that looked like survey lines that resembled charred maps into the forest. Rick's men stopped talking, acknowledging that they weren't the original dig in this place. Parker looked on in shock and rage and fear slamming into each other. If since these indications were authentic, it indicated there had been miners or adventurers here, centuries before, pursuing the identical no. They were stealing wealth from the ground. If they hadn't succeeded, the query lingered in the chilly air like smoke. Why? Although excavation paused, the sense of urgency only intensified. Each beam that was taken out of the whole variety of coordinates, numbers, and markers. Lastly, a date was burned into the grain. 1897. Music, it wasn't a random year. It was that peak of the gold rush in Klondike, when prospectors and their thousands flooded the earth in pursuit of riches outside of creativity. For a long time, historians thought that dozens of expeditions disappeared into thin air in unexplored wilderness. Presently, Teddy held the evidence and authenticated a single, ruthless conclusion. This precise deposit had been reached by someone, struck gold almost a century ago, and disappeared silently, the Weissman flying, thundering across the darkness, tensions erupting into yellow directives and quiet scowls throughout the claim lines. As the beams then gave way to deeper soil, the actual extent became apparent itself. Below the fallen building was a vast empty space, an old underground passageway that glaciers have dug out and sealed for thousands of years. The inertial readings from scans illuminated, defying understanding. Gold-filled pockets, so if they were focused, they could dwarf anything ever created by the Klondike. Thicru stood speechless, gasping for air. The icy atmosphere, understanding the battle was no longer between Parker and Rick. Regarding pride or competition. They had discovered a jackpot so enormous it could control empires as well as wealth. When activity replaced the shock, Flood's freshly revealed cavern was illuminated, shadows engulfing their rays that extended indefinitely into the ground. Cables were anchored by Rick's crew, lowering scanning devices into the void, and the information enigma was deepened when they returned. Dense gold pockets illuminated the imagined similar to fire veins, although they weren't arbitrary. They folded and curled in various ways. Geologists couldn't understand. The program struggled to depict the designs, regressing in a downward spiral labyrinth, which differs from natural or immoral like the carefully planned vaults. As the machines continued to push, Parker steamed caught pieces that were taken from empty space. Unusual metal alloys fused together into the actual gold, alloys that our contemporary labs were unable to recreate without sophisticated drilling. According to analysis, they had been exposed to temperatures that are far beyond what would ordinarily happen in the crust. The flying forensic metallurgist under the radar and started chatting regarding missing refining techniques that might have precedent industrialities. However, said the readings were accurate. He initially arrived at this cavern may have well-known metallurgical secrets that since then science had forgotten. The competition innately transformed from rage into obsession. Each bit of dirt turned into a battleground. Then the collapse occurred. A portion of the cavern roof collapsed, weighed down by large machinery, exposing a secret room that is tightly sealed by ice and rock. Within, preserved inlay artifacts and crystalline frosted unmistakable, a leather harness, rusted tin, corroded pickaxes, and strapskins and men's skeletal remains had already visited this place. Their bones were bent in odd ways, as if death hadn't arrived by terror, not by chance. On one skull, the rudimentary copper pendant continued to cling to their jaw, inscribed with a distinctive signal of a rose compass. This wasn't a random group of nomads. This individual was a prospector group from Klondike's time, and they had pushed defending something they never escaped with. The revelation divided the valley that resembles a fault line. Rick shoved deeper, certain that luck was merely outside the room, but Parker's rag hardened into calculating brutality. Had launched a plethora of pumps to empty Theka more quickly, being aware that time was passing away. As each gallon is siphoned, that there was more than gold on the cavern floor. It displayed whole racks of crystal development, mineral structures interspersed with uncommon metal flecks. Geologists amazed by the finding, not because of its beauty, but because of its consequences. The amount of osmium and iridium indicated that the cavern might be located at the top trajectory of an ancient meteor's impacted. If accurate, the actual gold may have been pushed upward in one catastrophe that altered the geology of the Yukon. Crews were drilling into Thesa. Suddenly, they found something that nobody anticipated. A flawlessly slender stone wall, too symmetrical to be natural, smooth, and set into its exterior were rivets of lines of hammered gold, similar to Thevo braces. As soon as the excavators broke through, the wall collapsed without rook, but to the air. A sealed, hollow, untouchable since the 19th century, spacier even much before. The initial illumination that penetrated the interior showed stacked boxes covered with decayed canvas, diverters that were covered in frozen dirt. The odor of rotting wood combined with something metallic and nearly electrical, occupying the cavern like an impending storm. The first crate was forced open by Rick's guys, and the scene exploded via Thicru's like thunder. There was rawness inside, thick bricks of pure gold, ingots, marked in a way that no one could determine. They weren't seals from the government, not to mention Klondike Corp. Klondike Corporation marks. The inscriptions were quite ancient, appearing Templar, with crosses and labelled with concentric circles on the metal. A few ingots weighed more than 50 each, more substantial than any Parker has observed in a mini lifespan. In a matter of seconds, That profit became less important than mythology. It was more than just Yukon gold. This was anything concealed, carried, and ingrained with purpose. However, the crates were just the start. Behind them, further into the room, there were stacked scroll tubes with copper casings sealed within. As they aged, their surfaces turned black. When there was a burst of dry air as one was wrenched open, fled with parchment still in hand. Undamaged, pages were dotted with symbols, maps, diagrams, including what appeared to be coded directions for moving across valleys and rivers long obliterated by glaciers. Parker's group, despite their raid jeep being excluded, was unable to ignore thick sequences. These weren't mere lineaments of an unsuccessful mining operation. They appeared to be expeditionary records much older. A trip that had included knowledge and buried it in the Yukon, underlying the permafrost above ground. Chaos broke out. Teams squabbled for control of the room. Markers for claims were removed and replanted with armed security, and mud started to circle both operations. However, below the surface, the findings maintained gushing out, enormous veins that shining like fire rivers. Containers of gold was so heavy that cranes were required to lift, artifacts left by missing miners, and maps that indicate even larger hordes northwards. The valley was home to changed to become anything greater than a gold field. It was now an open wound throughout history, leading wealth and secrets more quickly than anyone could contain. Additionally, the last box waste floodlights are being pulled into it, markings that are more precise, tidy, only fact, more purposeful than the others grew clear in the midst of the confusion. That the Jackpot wasn't only genuine, it was designed to be located. When the crow barbed it into its wood, causing the lid to break a jagged fissure, and what was inside brought the enigma to a very different level. The seal looked like a code wheel, rings of symbols that are concentric with each flicker of light. It changed. As even though the layout itself included a code, the gold was not bar stacked, but formed into locked arcs forming a flawless disk, a golden map, with lines extending forth from Aoni's central location. There was silence. This wasn't worth trading or using as money. There was a message. The surface of the disk shimmering with coastline carvings as well as rivers, but not in any contemporary map. Stretched glacial patterns across long eroded fields. The rivers inscribed in ways that no topographer could acknowledge. On-site geological specialists disagreed over Earth impractical. They were land structures that had been preserved throughout thousands of years before to the most recent ice age. Parker grabbed a piece, his gloved hand shuddering, and drew a crooked line north into areas that have not yet been explored by many. Should the disk be precise, it indicated unexplored gold fields concealed under ice sheets, unaffected by any haste or assertion. The epiphany more profound than competition. This wasn't a jackpot. It was a key. The disk was assembled beneath the lamps, an evident unfamiliar detail surfaced. Incorporated into its arcs featured delicate silver inlays and patterns of iridium alignment. That like constellations. Later, astronomers verified the designs correspond to 12,000-year-old star maps, implying that the artifact wasn't merely Earth's map, but a combination of heaven and ground. The query was twisted in each mind watching. Who knew enough to with such accuracy? Moreover, why had it been buried with gold crates? The cave no longer seemed like a breakthrough. It seemed orchestrated, as though generations had worked together to conceal and then expose it. Further inside the chamber, under the ice layers, the excavator that Rick had bolted to the bedrock teeth slammed into a solid object. Initially, it appeared to be a different vein, but when Bucket ascended and carried stone, in contrast to the Yukon, any other, slabs that had been polished, rectangular, and jet black, fastened together as if they had previously created a structure. Symbols ran beside their edges, an angular form more, spirals strikingly reminiscent of the engravings on Templar artifacts discovered in Europe. Archaeologists, specializing in forensics, called an unearth. Stone was verified by the Darkness .was and single quotes T native. Its makeup matched volcanic rock, but only thousands of miles away. It had been transported by someone, purposefully building a vault in the wilderness to contain gold and wisdom that transcends its time. The disclosure ushered ancient myths, rumors of lost expeditions, tales of contact in Europe, millennia earlier stories of disappearing Norse ships, and Columbusel melded into the ice-choked Atlantis into one potentiality. If the slabs were real, powers much older than Yukon was fertilized by Klondike miners, coding gold not just with their secrets, but also similar to wealth, but also as a trail and a lure look for those who are willing to take risks. Everything Parker was furious with the idea of Rick in charge of it, but Rick pushed more forcefully, forcing machinery into the ice. Every new finding feeds the flames of competition into open combat. The following everything changed when the drill struck. A sharp scream reverberated throughout the cavern as hollow metal ripped from steel. When the excavator pulled away, it brought pieces of iron with a sealed container stringed in with bronze bands within. Kept in vacuum cylindriness, there were papers that appeared in the Yukon. Existence is impossible. Perfrost. Vellum pages with inscriptions and laden. Their ink hardly changed color, outlining the relocation encoded prose of a mob unsuited to monarchs. Dates corresponding to the early 1500s, the exact period when Templars spread throughout Europe. Ships were sketched on the margins, their sails emblazoned with the same insignia. Assholes etched into the dark slabs underneath. The Yukon cavern wasn't created by chance. Geology. The vault was purposefully selected as the last resting place for formerly hunted across oceans as cargo. Startles circulated among the crews as they handled the scale. They weren't merely in a mine. They stood in a civilization's graveyard, intersection where lost old maps, cosmological alignments, and explorers clashed. The jackpot of $170 million was a stratified deposit rather than a single one, planned and sealed inheritance to lost empires. Additionally, as the final packages were dragged upward, ice-soaked, Rick and Parker's gazes met across the rivalry that started in the floodlit cosmos. The gold-seeking miners had turned into something much more sinister, an unsaid conflict during the course of history. The burden of that disclosure appeared to tremble more than Themen. There was a seismic vibration on the cavern floor. As tremors rippled, monitors flashed. Outside the excavation area, crates remained buried beneath, shining in the half-exposed mud like bait, challenging them to delve further. Guards held firearms, eyes flitting between the gold, Tyler, and the competing crews. From above, each time, dust sifted from the ceiling. The earth groans. The treasure wasn't no longer merely a prize. A fuse was involved, and Rick and Parker were both standing at the head of the match. Rick's group swung cables, transporting an additional container through the frozen muck. However, when it broke the surface, there wasn't any gold. A bronze-bound, sealed chest and more substantial than stone, fractured beneath clamp that is hydraulic. There was atomized gear and disc lattice but still identifiable. Equipment that is precisely designed to accommodate with contemporary engineering. The parts joined to form a gadget that looked similar to an astrolabe, but its dials were inscribed with more than just stars, but accompanied by comet, eclipse, and alignments that date back thousands of years. Scientists' voices were harsh as they hurried. Forward. INCREDULOUSLY. The system might accurately chart celestial events hundreds of thousands of years ago and future. Whoever constructed it had anticipatedicals. Astronomy in the modern era had unlyrically verified. The mass of the disclosure caused a stir in the competition. Parker's winnings had changed into a bad dream. How beneficial was when the world would need this gold McKean, this evidence, this interference with past? For Rick, the discovery was blazing with fear and temptation. The assurance of wealth overshadowed by the understanding that perhaps possessing an artifact that can rewriting the history of civilization. As they quarreled, the machine hit once more, finding bones this time that are different from them from the Klondike, more expansive, fused with fittings made of bronze. The skeleton wore armor plates with runes engraved on them instead of it yet decoded. By its side lay a sword intact, its studded hilt with centuries-old gemstones faded. The discovery quieted even the mossmaners who have hardened and left the cavern full with fear that no floodlight could cut through. Above ground, the storm broke. Thundering helicopters swooped into the valley, the night being sliced by knives. Fire illuminating the campfires below with spotlights. Convoys without markings streamed in along third lines. Black uniformed men carefully spreading out, coordinating the valley without a word. Barked order silver radios combined with the cries of crews that are unwilling to give up their claim. Reporters who had spent days on the field at last made a breakthrough, their cameras capturing the mayhem. Grinding machines, rifles raised, containers lifted in caution. Hours later, the Yukon location was now a mine instead of a battlefield where science, history, and greed clashed beneath the Thunder Oath military grade. Engines, however, even as packages were confiscated by authorities. One artifact stayed concealed in the darkness below, buried behind slabs that have fallen. In the midst of the chaos, Rick's in the last chamber door. The spotlight froze, sealed stone, its surface intact, engraved with just one pattern that now might make a mistake. The identical cipher we lit indicated the disc of gold, the same reflecting like fire, the concentric cardial on its face. In contrast to the crates, in contrast to the bones, the gear-driven this door, machine, remained unaltered. Whatever was outside had been walled up, purposefully, not without abandonment. Rick extended their hand and traced the symbols using trembling hands, as though the stone were able to breathe beneath his touch. Thin jeans roaring overhead muffled Thegwiat. However, in the shadows, every man sensed the change, the understanding that Thegol was the lure, not the objective. That maps, the antiquities, and the containers were empty pieces strewn about like breadcrumbs that lead to a secret deeper still. The jackpot of $170 million was genuine, but it was merely the exterior of instead than being mined. The vault's purpose is toe-browsed. Additionally, as Rick's hand pressed the cavern against the chilly stone shook again, not from collapsing, but from a stirring motion on the opposite T side.